Hello and welcome to Need to Know, the programme that keeps you up to date with the big issues in education. In this programme, the government's proposals in their Education and Skills Bill to raise the education leaving age to 18. Here to help us understand the implications of this change is Mike Baker, and a significant change, isn't it, Mike?
Well, yes, it is, Sheena. Because the government are proposing a very big change, and while there are lots of misconceptions about it, which we'll come to later, we shouldn't underestimate its significance. This is the first raising of the minimum leaving age since way back in 1972, when amid all sorts of predictions of classroom chaos, it was lifted from 15 to 16. So what exactly are the changes and the timetable for their implementation? Well, the Education and Skills Bill, due to become law later this year, will introduce a requirement for young people to stay in education or training beyond the current statutory leaving age. So by 2013, all 17-year-olds must be in at least part-time education or training. Then from 2015, that extends to all 18-year-olds too. But it's worth emphasising, and here's one of those misconceptions, that this does not raise the school leaving age. There is no requirement to stay in school. The learning or training can take place in schools, colleges, with private training providers, or in the workplace. So 16-year-olds will still be able to take a job, but they must do at least 1 day a week or 280 hours a year of learning, working towards an accredited qualification. And all this won't come cheap. The government estimates it will cost an extra £775 million a year for each age cohort that stays on.
These are big changes. Why now?
Well, a lot of it goes back to the Leach Review, which you may have heard about, which looked at Britain's skills needs. And it says there's a really urgent need for us to upgrade our level of skills if we're going to compete as a competitive economy with other countries. And at the moment, we don't do terribly well in that area. And they particularly want to improve the skills at level 3, that sort of A-level equivalent, or level 4. Let's listen to Richard Weiner, who's the Education and Skills Policy Advisor at the CBI.
I think when employers tell us about their concerns about school leavers entering the labour market, their key concerns are literacy and numeracy and employability skills. Our surveys show that around half of employers are dissatisfied with these skills. So clearly there do need to be moves to improve these skills. And we've got big changes on the horizon with the introduction of new diplomas, raising the participation age, and changes to apprenticeships.
So Leach says we must raise our skill levels if we're to compete. How do we compare with other countries?
Well, he does, because at the moment, our current leaving age is about average for the European Union and other developed countries, most of which opt for 16, as we currently do. Now, a few are already higher than us, though. In Germany and the Netherlands, it's already 18, and in the United States, it's 17. The problem comes when we compare how well we do at keeping our 17-year-olds in some sort of learning. Now, we manage around 77% of this age group in at least part-time educational training. That's less than the average for the developed world. Indeed, we are in about 20th place out of 30 OECD countries. Not very impressive. And that means we're well behind countries like Korea, the Scandinavian countries, and indeed several EU and Eastern European countries who manage participation rates of about 90%.
So is this initiative really aimed at the so-called NEET, the acronym for those youngsters in no education, employment or training?
Yes, it is very much at that group, because there's a real concern that, whereas at the moment there are quite a lot of jobs in the economy for unskilled workers, all the predictions are that in the future there won't be those sort of jobs around. Let's listen to Richard Weiner from the CBI again.
Well, I think the issue about NEETs, I think we've got about nearly 1 in 10 of 16 and 17-year-olds are completely inactive. They're not in any education, any training, any employment. So raising the participation age will help, as long as there are attractive choices for these young people to choose. It's not about forcing them back into the classroom, which clearly they didn't find particularly attractive when they were at school. It's about making sure there are options for them, whether that's diplomas, apprenticeships, work-based learning, employment opportunities, that they actually see value in taking, rather than just being completely inactive.
So there'll have to be attractive choices. What will attract these disaffected 17 and 18-year-olds?
Well, that is the big question, really, because, as we said, this is not a raising of the school leaving age. People have likened it to 1972, when all 15-year-olds had to stay an extra year at school. Teachers were not happy, predicting a lot of large, bored, undisciplined teenagers hanging about when they wanted to be out at work. But this is different. While government projections show some increase in the proportion staying on at school, the much bigger increases will be at FE colleges and in work-based learning. Indeed, compared to today, by 2013, the government predicts only an extra 5,000 16 to 17-year-olds in schools. And when the leaving age raises to 18 in 2015, that would rise to about 15,000 extra students. By contrast, FE colleges would get an extra 13,000 in 2013 and 31,000 in 2015.
And what kind of qualifications will be on offer? We heard about MOOC qualifications recently, which got a mixed press.
They did, and actually rather unfairly, because people were saying that they were the same thing as A-levels. They're not the same, they're just at an equivalent level. And that's all going to be an important pathway, because a lot of employers will be offering their own qualifications, and if they're accredited, which is what this McDonald's was all about, if they're accredited, it means they can carry those qualifications to other employers as well, which will be very important.
Can you give us some examples?
Yes, indeed. Because let's take, for example, 3 very different 16-year-olds, Sarah, James and Michelle. Now, Sarah has done well in her GCSEs and wants to pursue an academic route, typically A-levels, but with increasing options like the Cambridge Pre-U or the International Baccalaureate. Now, James has never really been academically minded and wants to pursue more practical, career-related education. But by 2013, when everyone has to stay in until 17, he will have a full array of diplomas at levels 1, 2 and 3 to follow, along with some 180 different apprenticeship frameworks and advanced apprenticeships, which offer the chance to work while gaining NVQs at level 2 and 3. Michelle is already out working as an assistant in a local salon. She will combine her work with a qualification offered by her employer, but accredited under the Qualifications Credit Framework, which gives a broad equivalence with national qualifications like GCSEs and A-levels. For more on those sorts of qualifications, here's Richard Weiner from the CBI again.
Well, I think these qualifications that the likes of McDonald's, Network Rail and Flybe are offering now will be very valuable. They'll ensure that young people and adults will be developing the skills that are really valued by employers, not just those delivering the training, but those within the sector as well. And if we can ensure that that training is high quality, these firms have gone through all the same quality assurance processes as existing awarding bodies, then they will have value, and not just within those specific firms, but across the sectors as a whole.
You know, I think many young people will be unpersuaded by the idea of compulsory participation at the age of 16. Can this be enforced?
Well, it will be enforced, and that's why there's a bill going through Parliament at the moment. But that's not without its controversy, because indeed some of the opposition parties are not happy with the compulsory element. Let's listen now to the Shadow Schools Secretary, Michael Gove.
Fantastic aspiration, absolutely right, wrong method. The problem with compulsion is that the government can't even control truancy rates at the age of 12 or 13. So how are they going to force 17 or 18-year-olds to be in the classroom? If 17 and 18-year-olds are in the classroom against their will, does that mean that classrooms and learning spaces are going to be better ordered and more purposeful places, or more disruptive? I think we all know the answer to that question, and certainly I'm sure that teachers do. And the other thing as well, for those people who leave school at 16 and then go into a job, why should they be penalised if they're enjoying their job and their employer is happy with their work, simply because they won't accept precisely the level of training?
Is Michael Gove right?
Well, he's perfectly entitled to his point of view, of course, and others share it as well. But what I think was slightly unfair, he was more or less implying that these young people will all be staying in the classroom. As we made clear, they won't necessarily be staying in schools, and some of their learning will be in the workplace, or it might be in FE colleges. But nevertheless, I think there are still people who are concerned. The teaching unions, for example. Let's listen to John Bangs, the National Union of Teachers.
Actually threatening probably already alienated young people is not the best way of motivating them. And it's that particular conundrum. It is the actual problematic core of the Education and Training Bill, which has the magic word compulsion in it. And to a certain extent, I wish that hadn't happened. If I want to see compulsion, I think what we really want to see compulsion on is compulsion on local authorities and government to provide enough resources. It's compulsion on government to provide enough training and professional development. It's compulsion on firms to work closely with schools. That's where the compulsion ought to be.
Yes, the word compulsion is in the bill. How does the government see that being implemented in practice?
Interesting one, that, because there will be a mixture of carrot and stick. Now, the carrot comes in the form of an extension of the education maintenance allowances, which pays the young person up to £30 or £40 a week for attending courses. But the new law also creates a duty on young people to participate and a duty on parents to assist their children to stay on in education. There are also duties on employers to release young workers for training and studying, and on schools and colleges to inform the authorities if young people drop out.
Duty doesn't win all hearts and minds. What if they just don't turn up?
Well, that's also an interesting one, because that is indeed where it gets rather tricky. The first step will be the issuing of an attendance notice. Now, this will specify exactly when and where the young person must attend. The young person can appeal against the nature of the provision, but they will have to attend somewhere. If they continue to refuse to turn up, then the local authority can issue a fixed penalty notice, in other words, an instant fine. If the young person refuses to pay that, they could be brought before the youth court, where they could face a further fine, an attachment from wages, or the imposition of unpaid work. However, the youth court cannot impose a custodial sentence for this.
Now, you mentioned that parents will have a duty. Is there a big stick to persuade them? I don't know, fines, imprisonment?
Well, as you know, they can be sent to prison if their children under 16 are truanting, as a last resort. But no, that's not quite the same here, because it's accepted that it's rather more difficult for parents to have that sort of control once the children are 17 or 18. Nevertheless, if they are obstructing in any sort of way their young people from attending courses, for example, if they run their own business and they're employing them and they're not giving them any time to train, then that's a different matter. They could then be subject to a parenting order, which they would then have to comply with the requirements in that.
Now, what about the young people themselves? Compelling 16, 17, 18-year-olds to do anything is a challenge. How are they responding to this initiative?
It is a challenge, and actually so far, the opinion polls have shown that most young people are not at all happy with the idea of compulsion. And there will be concern, I think, if these attendance orders do start to be imposed. And there's also a slight risk, I suppose, rather like the ASBOs. It'll be like a badge of honour. I've got an attendance order for not turning up.
What about teachers? Burden, opportunity?
I think teachers are a bit wary about this, because so many of them have got long memories. They can remember the raising the school leaving age before. Let's listen to John Bangs of the National Union of Teachers again.
Well, I think teachers are wary about it, because some of the older teachers have a folk memory of what happened back in the early 70s, ROSLA as it was called, raising the school leaving age, when schools were simply told that I think 15-year-olds had to stay until 16. There was an extra year in school. Nothing happened in terms of the curriculum or anything else. So you've got a whole load of stroppy young people who had to be coped with, in inverted commas. So I think teachers themselves are a bit worried about it, actually. Many teachers are.
All in all, Mike, this initiative strikes me as a high-risk strategy.
I think it is. It's quite a difficult one to do. But you see, if the government hadn't said, let's make it compulsory, we hadn't been passing a bill, then we wouldn't be having all this fuss about it. There wouldn't have been all this focus on it. It would have been just a vague aspiration, which we've had before. And as we know, when we look at international comparisons, as we heard about earlier, we aren't doing very well. So it needed something a little bit stronger there to really make an impact. And I think the other thing is, if you look back to when it went up from 15 to 16, raising the school leaving age then, there was a huge row about it beforehand, but now nobody really would want to go back to where we were before.
Mike Baker, thank you. And that's what you need to know about the plans to raise the education leaving age. For more information, you can visit our website and join us next time when Mike will brief you on another of education's hot topics. Until then, from me and Mike Baker, goodbye.